We've got Ted Sarandos, Chief Content Officer for Netflix. How many of you watch House of Cards? I am so... Kevin Spacey, man. Robin Wright. It's such a cool and unusual new format. And Brian Bedol, founder and CEO of Bedrock Media Ventures. I was going to start with Brian in a minute, which I'll get to in a session, but Brian's had a fantastic career as a startup founder and TV executive. Has sold what he created as a classic sports network to ESPN. Was John Skipper there yet, or was that somebody else?
John was doing the magazine.
$175 million. Was that private or public? Did you get to pocket most of that?
Very little of it.
We had outside investors. And but basically, you know, he's been engaged as a real disruptor, innovator, and from what I have in front of me, seems to have done very, very well in that arena. I asked him a moment ago, have you ever failed at anything? Anything kind of gone belly up? And we'll get to that. But I do want to engage all of you in a conversation as well, because I think these are exciting times. I mean, I think that when you look at these little iPhone gadgets and what may be coming next, you know, when you go spend time with Google people or Apple people, the things that we all think are going to be consistent around for a long time won't be. There's a new generation of sensors and of interaction, and I normally have my Jawbone thing here with my wearable tell me how well I sleep at night, but I forgot to put it on today. That we're just entering a very different era, and so I wanted to basically open this up and start with Ted and say, you know, Netflix decided to get out of the DVD distribution business and really merge to some degree content creation with the sort of channels you had. Yeah. And how did the rest of the network world take what you're doing?
Well, you know, we didn't actually get out of it.
We're going to drop our Netflix subscriptions?
Yeah, people threaten that a lot. But it was interesting that we didn't really get out of the DVD business. We still have millions of people take disc in the mail, and there's probably millions of people who don't have access to great broadband in the middle of the country and in rural America. And to them, you know, that's the most efficient way to get digital bits to them is put it on a disc and put them in the mail. And that will change, obviously, over time. But right now, you know, we were watching this space build for a long time. When I met Reed in 1999, we talked about Netflix like it exists right now. Mostly a digital product that would all still be doing some discs through the mail, but that the tipping point for us was, when will it be cheaper to stream the bits than it is to mail them? And if we get in too much earlier than that, we're going to waste a lot of money, and if we get in too much later than that, we're going to miss the curve. So we had that thing we were watching to the penny. When it was going to cross that threshold is when the streaming economics made more sense than the postal economics.
I mean, you guys got like to the edge of looking like you were going to be a failed company, right? I mean, you got right to the. I mean, your stock was down. People doubted your leadership. Yeah. It was there, and then all of a sudden, kabang! House of Cards, Kevin Spacey, and all that. I mean, maybe I have a lot of this wrong, but
no.
I think a lot of people doubted that the Netflix model was really all that new.
Yeah, that's the narrative. I mean, right. But when you actually look back at it, if you look back at our quarter after quarter after quarter since we've been a public company, our business fundamentals have been straight up and to the right throughout all those times, even when the stock was cratering. So our business fundamentals didn't really change much, but people's belief in the story, when we started shifting the model and getting a little further, creating more distance from the DVD business, then people's confidence in us shrunk, and then the stock cratered. But we were positive revenue, positive growth. We had a hiccup in subscribers that one quarter that we recovered from rapidly the following quarter, and it took us a couple of years to come back. And it appears that it came back on the strength of original programming, but I think what it did is it came back on the strength of a new narrative, which was, oh, this is a new model that's going to. This sounds a lot closer to what we believed about Netflix before, which is that the generation watching television today is not going to grow up and suddenly start watching TV on the grid. Now I'm going to start watching my shows Wednesday night at 8 o'clock only.
But before I jump to Brian, do you view yourself as a wannabe cable network?
No, I mean, that would imply that the way the world sits today is where it's going to sit 10 years from now. Right. We're going to be one of them. I think what happens is that if I believe that the internet is going to deliver most filmed entertainment to most households, and that our intent is to lead that space. And there's always going to be a place for cable-delivered and broadcast-delivered content, mostly in the live arena. Broadcast, in its definition, is to get to as many people as possible at the same time. And for us, it's very much about the very personalized experience of watching exactly what you want, exactly when you want, on any device you want. So that's, to me, I think the properties of our business are very different from those of a typical cable network.
Now, Brian, if I were going to write a script about you and your life and try and sell it to Netflix to run, you'd call it Cable Network Killer, right? And maybe we got a lot of shows, but you're the one threatening cable networks. You're basically saying you're going to come take them on, rip their throats out.
Well, the big companies have always left a lot of room, and as companies get bigger and bigger, there's more and more room in the edges. And we've always been willing to, I would say, work hard and herd cats, which, considering cats on the internet, that's a good thing. As we've discovered, is that if you're willing to herd cats and put together big businesses out of little ones, you can create value. And so we didn't set out to kill cable or to hurt cable. We set out, Classic Sports Network was basically recycled sports. I had been involved with Nick at Night, saw how successful Nick at Night was in creating this an emotional connection, and realized that there were big libraries of stuff just collecting dust that nobody was watching. And we said, let's create a Nick at Night of sports. So it's always been more about, are there niche opportunities that consumers will respond to that the big guys just aren't doing?
But that's then driving, that's just like being a smart producer, right? There are people who make movies or make TV shows, but what are you doing when you set out that you're really out there to disrupt cable networks? It seems to me that that's a question beyond just content, right?
Yeah, well, it's the experience. Cable was about choice. The revolution of cable was giving people who had 3 choices, ultimately hundreds of choices. As Ted said, the internet is about personalization. Everybody's experience is different, and everybody's interests are different. And once you're able to get a personalized experience, you're never going back to an experience that someone else wants to spoon feed you. And so, we look at it as an intersection of technology and content is required to really create these personalized user experiences built in many cases around very small niches that when you were programming for cable you couldn't afford because you had satellite, you had 24-hour a day, you had all of these economic restrictions that forced you to think about big categories. With the internet, but if you think about it, people really only watch of their favorite networks a couple of hours a week. It's even though they have to program 24 hours a day. So if you could create so-called networks that were just a couple of hours a week, and that's all you had to create, and people could then access it when they wanted, where they wanted, on whatever device they wanted, then suddenly the economics are very different, and you can deliver a very personalized experience.
Can I ask you guys, we have, I thought I saw Jules Ganikowski. Is he here?
He said he had to make a call, was coming back.
So we're going to talk about Julius. Julius was
talk about him now that
immediate
he's not
past chairman of the FCC. And the FCC plays in this space. The FCC plays in broadband, plays what is available in Spectrum. And I'm interested into what degree the FCC in your arena has either made smart decisions or really bad ones in terms of creating the ecosystem, the kind of room for digital bits, so that you guys can thrive. Has it been an issue or not?
Well, it's been an indirect issue because we want people to have ubiquitous broadband.
Right.
And I think that certainly that was Julius's position in doing what he could in the position that he was in.
And do you think we have that today?
No, I think that we're
when I go to
close.
South Korea, and I see in South Korea, I can watch TV shows, I can go on trains and go through mountains, and I never drop a call.
We just launched our service in the Nordics, and in Norway, the cheapest, the poorest guy in town's got faster broadband than you do, and always has. So we are really behind. So what Julius has done, and I think what the FCC has done, is created an atmosphere for it, but I don't think really has moved.
And it is a factor then as you begin looking at technology and all of the gadgets we have that there's an infrastructure deficit.
The behavior is so different. You go to Norway, and the people there have a different expectation of the internet. Well, they expect to have an answer. They expect to have their show when they want it. They expect, and if you don't deliver it to them, it's a huge piracy market. That's why Sweden is piracy as a political movement, because it becomes a human right to have things when you have that, when you always have had them. So.
Universal Declaration, broadband for everyone.
You know, the companies that have the most at stake in this transition happen to be the ones who control the biggest pipes.
Yeah.
So, you know, you've got, to the degree that we talk about disrupting cable, the reality is all we're really talking about is disrupting the status quo of the way linear television channels are bought and sold, because the cable operators, in fact, control broadband. So, you know, I think that you know, one of the issues that needs to be dealt with is
they control broadband because they sit on so much spectrum. Is that?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, the majority of broadband subscribers get broadband from their cable companies,
and it's such a vastly superior product to DSL that it really is in itself a monopoly that the cable companies will actually benefit from more than anybody.
So you mentioned pipes, and I think it's very, very important when you think about, I think part of what today's forum is supposed to be about is if we've got an innovator, an entrepreneur who's got some great content ideas, how does this person, you know, become the next Netflix? How do you basically create and distribute the next show if you basically have so many other dominant players? Are they giants that will fall? And what's the strategy that you guys have for that? Or is that just kind of folly, that fundamentally that's the world we're going to have? Or, you know, because you've done this. I mean, you sat back one day and you said, you know, you had this idea we're going to be digital someday, digital streaming. But I'm sure it's in a shockwave through the cable networks.
Yeah, I mean, in its earliest days, nobody knew.
Does Richard Plepler talk to you?
Oh yeah, not friendly though.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. He's a great guy. He's a great
Richard
guy.
Plepler, by the way, is the CEO of HBO.
Yeah,
He's also doing really great
And
programming.
we talk a lot about HBO as a competitor, really just in shorthand. We compete with them directly for shows, for original
Plepler
shows.
says Netflix is really not a competitor.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, we don't have one piece of identical programming, right? So you can't really say I'm going to choose Netflix instead of HBO and watch Game of Thrones, or I'm going to pitch HBO instead of Netflix and watch House of Cards. So in that way, we don't compete at all. But we do compete with HBO and everybody on cable is time and attention. We internally call it moments of truth. When you sit down on your couch and you pick up a remote, which one do you pick up? The one that runs through the cable channels or the one that activates the device that puts Netflix to your TV? What I thought was great in your last panel on ESPN when John Skipper said that about a third of the people who watched programming on ESPN were watching it on a device. What's interesting is about 2/3 of Netflix subscribers watch their content on a television. So it's not, you know, he is right, the convergence is here and it's happening both ways. So, but when I look at these things and think about who do we compete with, where do we go, how does the next person break, can Netflix happen again? The interesting thing is I think it's just thresholds for programming. So if you are, to your point, you're programming a 24-hour network, you have a couple hours of prime time, it's extremely precious, those hours. Everything in those periods has to work. That's why there's a 70% failure rate of new series, because they just have to grind through them to find one that works. So if you're writing a TV show and you're trying to get it on a network, your chances of breaking through are pretty slim. And we can, because of the economics of our business and our distribution and our discovery and our marketing, the threshold for those shows can come down so more shows can get a shot. And because it's highly personalized, you know, people talked about Hemlock Grove as not being as successful as House of Cards. Right. We picked up Hemlock Grove for a second season because it was wildly successful in its demographic. And we can support a show for that many millions of people to watch. And we just control the economics of how it gets made and all those things. And there's more, that way you can have a lot more choice and a lot more taste all operating at the same time if you don't have the preciousness of the 3 hours of prime time to deal with.
Right. Well, you know, and then the other difference, just to comment on that raises is that, you know, prime time used to force you, it was when you were tethered to your TV. You were sitting in your living room and there was a finite amount of time you could watch TV. What mobile allows is prime time is any time. What mobile gives you is the ability to watch that show on Netflix, to binge view Game of Thrones House of Cards.
Thank you.
Yeah. To steal Game of Thrones, that's what I meant.
If you choose to.
Yeah. To binge view House of Cards when you're on vacation or wherever you are, because, you know, prime time is no longer in your living room.
Because they've got them on the flights.
Yeah, exactly.
So, But if my information is right,
but the great
Brian,
thing is that
you've
you don't
got
have to disconnect.
soccer, action sports, comedy, and fashion, and he's got kind of DC inside the Beltway politics.
Well, we do some news too. We have a channel called Now This News.
Right. So you're
that's actually the best distinction, which is we don't do anything that's particularly live.
Right.
We don't do sports. We don't do news. We don't do competition shows. We don't do anything that that is over when you know at some point. Then you go to work and everyone knows who did it. We don't do very much of that.
So Brian, can you explain to me how the economics of what you're doing, you basically made this distinction that what you're looking at is the pieces that the sort of big guys aren't going after. How do the economics of what you're doing really differ from what they're doing? When I used to run a think tank, the New American Foundation, I would say, you know, there are 1,500 think tanks in DC. We need to differentiate ourselves in a crowded marketplace.
Yep.
We had to be edgy, risk-taking, different. I don't know if we are today, but at the time we definitely were. But how are you differentiating yourself from the people I just interviewed?
Well, you know, I would say that, you know, it will play out over time. I think it will become apparent over time. We're very focused on, you know, I used the word user experience before. We're focused on, it's not just about the show, it's about the experience. We actually have a product department headed by the guy who built HBO Go and his product team. And we said, you know, let's create an experience that's better than you can get anywhere else on the internet, but built around this kind of programming. And let's make it so good that other programmers and other brands and other media companies will actually want to distribute their programming alongside our programming. So, you know, we think of it as being the early days of, you know, cable in the cloud. It's, you know, we're talking to millennials who have chosen, in many cases, not to subscribe to cable. They don't like the bundles. They don't like to be told that when to watch or what channels they need to buy, and it's $150. They want to be able to select what they want when they want it. So they're saying, you know, we want broadband, but we don't want cable. We're saying these audiences need programming too. And how can we make these channels available on an a la carte basis, the way they want to consume them, on the devices that they want. And hopefully it will be distinguished by the quality of the programming and ultimately by the user experience and innovation that's driven in the user experience.
And by the way, the only thing I would take exception, I don't think that the millennials, I don't think that the generation behind me is saying they don't want cable. They don't want cable like it is right now.
I agree with you.
High price cable. They don't want no choices. They don't want they don't have a lack of on-demand.
Totally. I mean, they love media. They love programming. They don't want bundles. They don't want to be. They don't want that all-you-can-eat package.
I have 500 or so channels, and I watch 4.
Yeah.
Right. So it would be nice if I could have just 4. But does the business model for that rich media establishment work if I only want 4, you only want 4? I don't know how many you might want.
No.
But do you have to basically shove down the throat of the consumer much more capacity than they want in terms of their doing?
The thing that we're doing that's different is, you know, we're direct to consumer. We're not distributed by anybody. So those bundles that are created by distributors. I think though, from your earlier panel, one of the downfalls of television has been it has evolved into a completely B2B business. It really isn't beholden to the audience anymore. So that's why I think so few programs are great. Now, Netflix is a direct-to-consumer relationship. If you don't like Netflix, you click one button and you cancel and you're done. And you don't have to buy anything else to get Netflix. So it's not a confused bundle. It's you choose, this is worth $8 a month for me or not, which puts a tremendous amount of pressure on me to pick the right content and our engineers to make sure the product works all the time and it works on all the devices. But cable, basically, you made a decision that once you're into it, if tomorrow they said you can pick your channels, I bet you wouldn't be able to figure out how to do it. It's so complex. If you wanted to get rid of HBO tomorrow, your bill would probably go up. That's how the distribution model is so complicated. So I think that the evolution of cable being, even ESPN, the most successful one, you know, 2/3 of the revenue comes from distribution fees, not from advertising. So that lowers the bar tremendously on what they have to deliver to the audience. At least advertising rates, you know, regulate success in terms of for the audience. People are tuning in.
You know, when you look at the content that is out there and you look how you're both disrupting both distribution, you're bringing on content, it raises a question. Not that everybody's going to go out and be able to kind of script something like House of Cards, which I think is brilliantly written from somebody who lives in that world. You know, we've always I've always wondered why wasn't there, you know, there was West Wing and there was but largely political shows are not popular broadly, and so I think it's a brilliantly written show. But you see organically out across the country and really the world, people creating their own stuff and bringing it forward. They're bringing it through in social media, they're bringing it through YouTube, they're bringing it through other arenas. And is that a real thing out there? Does self-created content, and it brings me to the reality show question. So reality shows, anybody watch reality shows? I want to kind of test how snobbish our audience is. I don't watch much reality show either. I'm definitely a TV snob. But it is something when you look at it, you say, wow, that is a low-cost thing. I mean, so how much of that factors into your guys' decisions about what comes next?
It's really why we don't do much reality programming on Netflix either, is that it's very kind of in the moment. It's more novel than it is actually, I think, high-quality entertainment, but it's okay. It's just a different economic model. Basically, if the audience is shrinking and we still have to program, let's get away from $3 million an hour drama and go to a couple $100,000 an hour reality. And unfortunately, I think that undermines the long-term economics of TV programming and TV networks. But I think that's where we're kind of creeping into right now.
Well, I think that if you look at the statistics, the young audiences, even though they're watching less traditional TV, they're spending more time, almost twice as much time with media and media devices as they did 10 years ago. So what they're doing is they're expanding their options, and they're not substituting a good movie on Netflix for what they're doing on YouTube in user-generated video. They're doing them both, and often they're doing them simultaneously. We're trying to create programming that recognizes much of what we do right now is short form, because we view the audience we're talking to as being a mobile-first audience that is consuming in short form. But it's much higher quality than they can do themselves, and I think that there's an economic basis to it that doesn't exist in user-generated.
By the way, if you want to see a great model, is this kid Freddie Wong, who makes there's a series on, it's called Video Game High School, it's online, that draws very respectable viewing, probably comparable to what's happening on Nick and Disney. Produces, basically crowdsources all the production through Kickstarter. So basically his community pays for the entire production. They go on YouTube, they sell advertising, they do quite well, and then they sell it to us. And we put it on, we collapse it down into a movie and put it on Netflix, and people watch it.
Who makes the profit, the Kickstarter types or him?
Him.
Yeah.
Him, yeah. It's a great business.
He owns it. I mean, so one of the things that's
and there's a real brand. Video Game High School is a real brand for tweeners.
One of the things that's going on is, when I was in traditional TV, I used to spend a lot of my time getting pitches, and producers would come in and they'd pitch you an idea, and then you'd fund a pilot and you'd see how it did. Now, I would say 90% plus of what we see is already shot. Is somebody will go out and shoot something, they'll cast their friends in it, they'll write it, they'll bring it to us, and they'll show us a video, and you're able to look at it and say, hey, this is worth doing more of. This is great. Let's give them a little bit of money.
So that's like the Huffington Post business model, right? You're getting other people to do stuff largely at low cost or for free.
Well, no, they're doing it as their way of piloting it. They're doing it as their way. So these are young producers who have access to tools that didn't exist 10 years ago. They grow up with cameras in their phones and in their hands, with more processing power and more film power than Orson Welles had. And they've got editing devices on their computers, and they're telling stories, and it's a filter, but these kids are now coming in, and it becomes a great way to say, is this worth putting money into and trying to help them distribute and monetize? Because getting an audience to see it's one thing to make it. The most difficult thing is getting an audience to see it.
I just want to acknowledge Julius Genichowski is back in the room here. We were talking about him earlier. They gave you a lot of credit for the aspiration of trying to create universal broadband, rip the incumbent broadcasters out of their tight clutches over the spectrum that's out there. But the kind of world and disruption that we're seeing would be impossible if you didn't have much more liberated spectrum and broadband. And so you were given credit for that, saying you didn't, your other commissioners didn't quite deliver enough, but you were given credit. Are either of you involved in international issues? Because one of the other things, when you mentioned the cloud, and I don't know if many people have thought about the cloud. When you think about the cloud are really data centers, large-scale data centers. They're in Brazil, they're in Canada, they're in Norway, they may be in Saudi Arabia, wherever. And one of the interesting challenges is, from a content perspective, not in entertainment, but who controls the rules and laws and rights over how that data based in Brazil is going to be managed, or in China. And it raises a really interesting question about property rights and copyright. And as you guys move into formats where so much of them, America's biggest export is its cultural exports, right, the stuff you guys produce. So do you think about the international dimensions and questions, and what lies out there as either opportunities or risks? How do you deal with the legal dimensions of that? You were talking about domestic competition, but what about international competition?
Well, it's a big issue, and we think about it a lot as we think about international markets. I would say that over the next couple of years, we'll be focusing on larger markets where the issues are not quite as great as in the developing markets. And we're doing it with local partners. So as we go international, we're not trying to do it ourselves. We're teaming up with someone in the territory and doing it. And trying to focus on the investment in the highest potential markets. I think that when you're in the IP business, that theft is just a part of the business, and it's got to be figured in. And in many cases, you just need to be prepared when you're able to monetize in a property to protect it, but you also know that it's going on. There's no way of truly preventing it.
Yeah. Regulating the internet is pretty politically unpopular everywhere in the world, and only successful really in China. And North Korea. No one else is
Point
really,
of national pride.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I think we've had that advantage, which is it is an open running room in terms of trying to build these businesses online, even outside of the U.S. We run into things. There's most of the political things that I get involved with, like in Canada, where we're not regulated the same way that broadcast television and cable television is regulated, which they're unhappy about. But I point out to them that if they were to operate online, they would not be subject to those regulations either. So things like supporting the Canadian content funds and all these kind of things that are really built to protect the existing business models and not very consumer focused. We get to kind of operate on the outside of those models. But our intent is that if that's the way it evolves, it will evolve that way, and we'll be subject to those things too. And what we have found is that it's there's not a lot of heavy-handedness regulating the internet around the world. So
can you give us, since you're content chief, can you show us a little ankle and tell us what's coming next in Netflix land on that we can all what we'll stream? What are the opportunities that we can pay you for?
Well, we've been very focused in the last 2 years on developing more and more original programming, like House of Cards. That we're right now shooting the second season. Next, in 2 weeks, we'll debut a show called Orange is the New Black that is created by Gingy Cohen, who created Weeds at Showtime. Oh. And it is a really fantastic show. Before it even premiered, we picked up a second season. We're so thrilled with the 13 hours that we have so far. And this is a true story that takes place in a women's prison in upstate New York. And it's the mix of drama and comedy that I think have made Weeds such a great show, too. We have a series that we bought out of the UK with starring and written and directed by Ricky Gervais called Derek. We have a second season of Lilyhammer coming up, which is a really interesting show. It was made for Norwegian television. It's 65% in Norwegian and 35% in English. Stars Stevie Van Zandt from Sopranos and Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. And talk about kind of show how do you break, right? He literally got through a chain of people, got to me and said, I got a phone call, and they said, do you want to take a phone call with Stevie Van Zandt? I said, of course I want to take a phone call with Stevie Van Zandt. And he said, we're working on this show in Norway. He goes, it's a long story, but I was producing a garage band in Norway. A couple presented this script to me. I thought it was really amazing, so we're making a TV show. And I want to show it to you. And I said, okay, well, send me the script. He goes, no, I'll send you some footage. I mean, they shot it already. I mean, it was already being shot. And it was made just for Norway. And it's about an American mobster living in witness relocation in Lillehammer, Norway. And he chose Lillehammer.
Already there.
Oh, there you go. And he chose Lillehammer because when he was watching the Olympics, he thought, that is a great place. And when he gets there, he finds out the Lillehammer of today is a little different than it was on television. And but the show, which is like, again, very kind of, you'd think very quite regional, actually travels for us all around the world. We bought it everywhere outside of Norway and the UK, and we have it in a fast follow window in those two markets. And like I said, for a show, for the number of viewers that we have on Netflix in the U.S. and Canada and Latin America, watching it, combination of dubbed and subtitled. The great thing about, I think, what we're doing is it's all about, at its core, all the technology is fantastic. The idea that you can watch it on this, the fact that that works, it's magic, all those things. But the truth is, it's all great storytelling. At the end of the day, it's the same thing that started since the beginning of man, which is telling stories. I don't give ratings. We don't release our ratings figures.
You won't even for me?
Not even for you. Not even for David Fincher. We don't even tell David Fincher. But I'll tell you why if it's of interest. But
well, I'm interested. I was going to ask you a question in the sense that when I see what you guys are doing with Netflix and what enables you to do it. I mean, you've got the trust on a content side. You've got like broad distribution, and I assume that Brian is in the same position. My good friend Ariana Huffington has built a franchise with a lot of connections to a lot of people, and with AOL and others, and she's got, she's best pals with Alec Baldwin and John Cusack and, other people that are creative content people. And it seems to me that given what Amazon is doing, that it wouldn't take much of a leap. We've got these folks out here from HuffPost Live that are doing kind of boring, wonky kind of policy chat, but it wouldn't take much to shift so that the players in this field would not just be the Netflix, that you could find other operations that just simply had that large sprawling network that touched a lot of people, who could basically also be television disruptors.
They exist. I think it's just the monetization models. So really, like YouTube is there. People can put things on YouTube. Can they aggregate an audience? Can they sell ads to support the creation of the content? For us, our content is all created from the subscription revenue. Right. We don't sell advertising. We have no distribution fees. It's all from subscription revenue.
So why don't you tell me how many people watch?
Well, first of all, it's a very different from the way when I would tell you a number, you would compare it to a ratings and say, well, a show on a network gets this, and a show on Netflix gets this. We actually do something quite different than television. We release the entire season at one time. So if you want to watch one episode or 13 episodes at once, you can watch at your leisure.
Right.
We don't really have any emphasis on watching Wednesday night at 8. We don't advertise when to get everyone together to watch, and everybody else does. So what we're going to do is we're going to aggregate an audience for House of Cards over a very long period. So maybe at some point we'll figure out.
How do you know what to fund and what to kill?
Because we have regression models that tell us, based on the first hour of viewing, how successful that show is going to be over the life of its license. So it's quite data-driven.
Is that model similar to yours?
Yeah, we have regression models too. We sit there and we say, okay, does it work? No.
And we do. Is it a success? Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But the truth
of it is, your ratings? No.
Yeah,
or viewership.
Our viewership is out there because view counts. At least the stuff that we distribute through
sell
YouTube.
Ads, it makes sense. Right.
And we sell ads. We need to. Yeah. But there will be. I think that it's an issue in many cases because people focus way too much on the numbers and they don't focus on engagement. They don't focus on. One of the things.
And by the way, as you know, do you live in D.C.?
Yeah.
Or,
right in the middle.
Does anyone in D.C. have not seen House of Cards? You know that it's a hit.
Well, I have to say,
you know that it's a hit without knowing a number.
I have to say, this is a bit of self-revelation that I think is going to get me in trouble. I went to a dinner recently, and it was one of these kind of typical cocktail party. I looked at a cocktail party-loving guy, and in D.C. Beltway, so the people that most of the country hate. But George Washington became big because of cocktail parties. But I was at a party, and people like Alan Greenspan and Andrea Mitchell and Senator Mark Warner and others were talking about both Downton Abbey, which I had been embarrassingly calling Downtown Abbey for a while, and then House of Cards. I hadn't watched either one, but everyone at the table had seen all of the episodes and had seen that Matthew was dead, and I didn't know who Matthew was. and in House of Cards went on about the fact that they were trying to guess the House members that Kevin Spacey was really based on. And I hadn't watched either one of these, and so I did become one of these binge watchers. I would watch 4 episodes of Downton Abbey. I finally got to the end of Downton Abbey and went into depression, and then replaced it with House of Cards, reunited my Netflix subscription, which I had let lapse, although it was hard to cut it off once you started. And I think that...
Not mechanically hard, emotionally hard. Mechanically it's easy.
I'll leave that to the magic. but I think that DC is now there. I think it may have taken them a while to do it. But fundamentally,
I had to send DVDs to President Obama because they can't stream inside. They couldn't do live streaming inside the White House.
Because of the threat that might pose, that you might be able to hack.
Yeah, so we had to send them DVDs.
The Chinese may be able to ride those bits in. But I want to open to the audience a minute. But I do think that that when we think about disruptors to TV, we think about disruptors to cable. One of the questions you were talking about was interacting when you had this. And what I'm not, when I see what world, if you go spend time at Intel or Apple or Cisco, which I've had the privilege to do, and you look at what they've got as the next things coming, our world is going to be totally different 5 years from now. 5 years ago, we didn't have all these contraptions, and we resculpted and shaped ourselves in very different ways. 5 years is now, are we going to be talking and interacting with your shows? Are we going to be telling, but it's,
I hope not.
Really? No?
Yeah, I mean, I think interactive viewing
interactive
viewing of a presidential debate is fantastic.
Right.
Or a sporting event, fantastic. I want to watch, when I want to watch storytelling, someone's going to tell me, a professional storyteller is going to tell me a story, why change the ending on him? Why hire him if I'm going to change the ending? I never really understood that attraction. And I can tell you one thing that I love about where we're at today. With House of Cards, when we put up all 13, I had every TV executive in Hollywood tell me what a moronic thing I was doing. You have to stretch it out. You have to keep people waiting for more. You have to keep them hungry. You have to, which is, managed dissatisfaction is what I called it. And the other one was, well, how are you going to make changes, from the reaction to the first episode?
Do you call them back and say, told you so?
No, because I mean it's a long story, so it's got to all play out. Right. But when I say like, how do you change based on the reaction? I go, well, I'm so glad that I don't get to. I'm glad that I don't, because it's a very powerful thing. So one thing we did for David Fincher, we showed him the first episode with a graph that showed when people watch it, at what points did they stop? Where did they turn it off? And a few minutes into the show, you see this little dip in viewing. And he goes, and you say, no, you know what happened there? Two things. Kevin Spacey did two things that turned some people off. He talked to the camera and he killed a dog. So people think back now. A network executive now might look at that in a rating and say, "He
no dogs,
he
no
can't talk to the
dogs,
camera, no killing dogs." And basically nothing.
I had to say that's what got me.
Yeah, exactly, right. and I think that's what happens is like once we get the material, we have the show, we go through. We're active in the process of creating, but with a very soft touch. We give data inputs in terms of casting, this person's more popular than that person on Netflix, so that's, all things being equal, let's go this way. But we gave very few creative notes on, and even David Fincher said, I may want your notes. I said, no, I don't think you do. I really don't think you do. You're being kind right now, but I don't think you do. So I think what happens is that what I want to do is use our business instincts and our data to pick the best people to tell the best stories and let them go. And if you watched Arrested Development on Netflix, you'll notice that it's 15 episodes, which is a funky episode count. Every episode has a different running time, because I don't think that there is a uniform time in which you must tell stories. If books were like that, they would all suck. And I've had people give me a long sermon about why comedy is 22 minutes long. And I said, I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And they said, no, it's 22 minutes, it's perfect because the director has to make choices, the writers have to make choices. And I go, look, I agree that 22 minutes is the perfect running time for a 22-minute sitcom. but that's it. So I really want to just we stay out of the way, pick the right content, pick the right storytellers, let the audience come or not, and if they do, we do more. If we don't, we do less.
Thanks. Let me open the conversation. We have a mic running around.
In the middle of the room, close by, and it's easy to connect.
Great. If you folks don't mind, and we'll have some fun. Take this gentleman first, and then go there.
Can you talk about what you see coming from the Google 1 terabyte installations in Austin, Kansas City, and Provo, and how they may expand? In addition, they want to tie in high-speed Wi-Fi with it?
Something I know absolutely nothing about, but Julius Genichowski might know. But Google 1-bit terabyte installations.
It's Norway in America.
This is Norway. So you're in favor. Are you in favor? Yes. So it basically this is helping to deliver the Genichowski commitment to universal broadband.
Fast broadband, ubiquitously distributed, is good for society, no question.
Fed to the NSA.
When do you guys? When do you guys see an over-the-top multi-channel video distributor coming, and what will it do to the business?
Thank you. And I'm going to ask our tall gentleman just to move to the left here, or kind of scrunch down so that the camera can get our speakers.
I don't know. I mean, we're mostly we're focused on not evolving to be cable on the internet, and that I think that consumers will probably manage multiple relationships rather than the way you manage multiple apps on your iPhone versus necessarily a gatekeeper emerging. So I'm not sure. There's some speculation around John Malone, who's up to that now. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that Intel is working on something that seems to be like that. I think that Malone is rumored to be working on a nationally distributed over-the-top network. I think that I think it's going to happen. I think the question is whether it's the programmers are able to unbundle their programming. It's a very complicated thing because, again, what people are disconnecting from cable for, as Ted said, isn't that they don't like the programming, they don't like the bundles. And there are very complex, long-term, most favored nations contracts that every one of the programmers has, that anything they do for someone new, they need to go back and do for everybody else. And so, this is the question that, everybody is asking and Washington is asking is when and how will this happen? I think it's the reason, initially YouTube was planning to make deals with cable operators. Using Google's dollars, they said, we're going to go and we're going to do deals with Disney, we'll do deals with ESPN, we'll get all this stuff on YouTube. And of course, they realized that it just was impossible to do.
Just real quick, just as a clarification, I know that Liberty, Malone's, a lot of the growth is international that they're doing. And are there different bundling concepts there, or do you still have, are the behaviors we have there mimicked in Europe?
Well, I think for the most part, the bundled channels are mimicked. I think that you don't have the competition there. Satellite generally penetrated the markets in most of Europe before cable did. So cable was the second entrant, and often is not as developed as satellite is there. So it's more of the inverse of what you see in the United States. But the rumor is with Malone here that he's looking to combine Charter and Time Warner and try to get national spectrum.
Sure. Yes, and if you'll identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Richard Robbins. I'm a writer and director, and I have quite a handful of things that can be viewed on Netflix, so I'm not totally disinterested, and a fan of what you're doing. But one of the disruptions we haven't seen on Netflix is the dominance of white men. All of the first series on Netflix were created by white men, and not a single minority.
We're getting there.
Not a single minority character on any of the shows, lead character. I'm glad to see Orange is the New Black is gonna change that slightly. But
the cast of Orange is the New Black is 99% women and probably 90% non-white. So
excellent, excellent. But are you concerned about changing that particular part of disrupting that part of the television model?
I think great storytelling has to dictate. And if great storytelling has many colors and many sexes and many sizes, but it has to emerge as great storytelling to drive it. I don't think there's a quota system that's going to get us there for sure. So,
great question. Yes.
Yeah, hi, Chris Wyatt from U2 Technologies. I have a question really for Brian. In terms of television disruption, your last company, Bluefin Labs, which you sold to Twitter, when do you think we're going to see a standard, an industry standard, which correlates social media activity, social television activity with ratings? How long do you think we're out from seeing that standard?
Great question.
I think there are a bunch of companies working on it. I think that had Bluefin stayed independent of Twitter, it was one of the things that Bluefin was working on. And but as part of Twitter, I think their business model changes. I think that there are 5 or 6 companies I read this week that were given access to Twitter data that seem to be moving in that direction. But it's a very different measure. I mean, ratings and engagement are 2 entirely different measures. And ratings is that snapshot in time that really isn't very reliable. Engagement is that measure of how long are people watching, how engaged are they, how closely are they watching. And it's something that social media provides that ratings never have. So, I think you'll see progress in the next year.
That's a good question. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Hari from PBS. Just wondering what your position is or opinion is on technologies like Aereo TV and what it will do to the sort of disaggregation and unbundling. I'm sure they're one technology. I'm sure there's going to be 5 more like them.
Ted?
I'm watching it with great curiosity, obviously. Julius probably could tell us a lot more about Aereo than I can.
Are you working?
No. But I mean, I just think it's an interesting thing to watch. I'm not. Julius, would you describe Aereo? I'll do it no justice, I'm sure.
For the camera.
Come to our session tomorrow morning.
There you go.
The session tomorrow morning with Julius, you're going to be interviewed, and you'll raise that.
Basically, it creates a virtual antenna system to bring over-the-air programming into the box and combine it with internet and charge a subscription fee to take off the air programming to the TV.
So it's watching broadcast TV over your computer, over your mobile device.
Got it. Yes.
Now you won't have to go to Julius' session.
Sleep late.
Sleep in.
My name is Melanie Shorin, and I'm from the Narrative Trust, which helps people tell their stories on video. But my question has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, I have 2 questions. What do you think about branded content? And also, my son works at Vice, and I'm wondering if you can tell me what the hell he's doing.
I think
what is Vice?
He asked me not to tell you. So I'll take a crack at branded content. You know, it's interesting at what's going on in branded content, because I think brands have often been sort of early pioneers in media businesses that didn't have clear business models. You know, I think that if you look at the early days of television, soap operas were really driven by Procter & Gamble's support of the concept of television, Palmolive, Colgate. You know, when we were launching college sports television that didn't have a clear business model, Coca-Cola had a big stake in college sports and the NCAA championships. And they came in and backed us in a big way because they wanted to see college sports get out into the market more ubiquitously. And I think, you know, in the world we're living in now, you see brands like Red Bull that have used content as a way of creating an emotional connection with audiences in between the transactions. And I think that more and more brands realize, you know, when we were doing sports, we had a bunch of conversations with Nike about did it make sense for them to do a sports channel to compete with ESPN. In the end, the economics didn't work. But when you're able to create these niche, inexpensive sports channels of a couple of hours at a time, it's very different. So I think you're going to see more and more brands who have that kind of connection with consumers use new distribution technologies to effectively build their own full-time channels.
Ted?
Yeah, I think branded content plays a role in the whole mix, and especially in the kind of post-ad interrupted world that we're probably going to emerge.
Post-ad interrupted world.
Where
sounds wonderful.
Yeah, just trying to figure out. I mean, I'm sure everyone's watching what you said about, you know, without commercials, it seems like a whole different experience. But yet, how do we monetize the content? So branded programming is one way to get there. I get a little nervous around how strong the influence has on the content itself, particularly in areas of journalism. So I prefer.
I worry about that every day.
Yeah, I prefer to keep that a little more pure.
You guys worry about that in your industry? You worry
no, I
about
mean
that?
we get pitched branded programming that feels just like a commercial, and it feels like a long commercial, which is probably worse than a short one. And so I think when executed well, it can be done very well.
That sounds like an easy no.
Yeah, on YouTube, Dove Soap did this really great thing where people came in and were about self-image, and it was people came in and described themselves to a crime art, you know, the guys who draw the witness pictures, and they described themselves, and the guy drew their picture, and then they had other people come in and describe them who have just met them and how different they look in those pictures. But it's all basically a branded spot for Dove that's happening on YouTube. But it's really interesting.
But I think that smart brands aren't trying to sneak coffee cups into scenes in movies. I think that smart brands realize that they need to be upfront and honest with consumers and say, you're getting to see this content because we, the brand, are supporting it or funding it, and it's got to be consistent with the brand. I mean, I think that sort of the old form of branded entertainment or branded programming, where it was just about how can brands somehow weave into a show and instead of having a commercial, sort of sneak their product out to the audience. I just think the bullshit detectors go off and it doesn't
Well,
work.
it's like seeing Jimmy Kimmel do the commercials live on his show now, the way that Steve Allen used to in the old days.
Yep.
And it's so much more fun. And the commercial, you pay attention, you don't change channels. And
Well, social media has totally changed the relationship brands have with consumers. I mean, did you ever think there would be a time where you would like a brand, where you'd sort of, follow a brand? So, the relationships are different, and the brands need to change the way they think about their customers, in the same way.
Zach Carabell.
Hi, I'm Zach Carabell. Thank you, Steve. So unlike Steve, I never cancel my Netflix, but I do have 3 DVDs that are 18 months overdue. And I was hoping that I could FedEx them tomorrow and give them to you, because otherwise they're staying there for the duration.
You own them by now?
Drop them in the
No,
mail
I think
anytime.
it's a great business model. There's no more late fees, and I've never canceled, even though I never watched. So thank you. But
That's the emotional connection.
it is. It's profound.
Very loyal.
Do you still have your AOL dial-up?
I'm one of the first
I like
150
that
users of
Zach feels
AOL, and I,
comfortable
in
with
fact, have an
delinquency.
AOL email address. So thank you for pointing
I
that
think
out
you
as
still
well.
pay AOL.
I collect old email addresses. So I'm wondering, just the question about disruption, right? There's disruption in technology, and there's a Silicon Valley model, which is, new things, and the next device is ineluctably going to push out the old ones. But I wonder, is there really any disruption in content now, or is it just with 9 billion people or 6 to 9 billion people, an endlessly opening funnel, which is basically catnip? I mean, if you're providing content, right? Is it really a competitive universe the way we think about that, or is it just a proliferating universe?
That's interesting.
I think so. To date, Netflix has been remarkably complementary to the existing ecosystem. It's cheap. It's easy to use. You love the content that's on there. It isn't, again, the more that we're unique and exclusive and original, the less that you're choosing the same programming from one outlet or another. And I just think it's been, the real disruption has been, I think, the rule changing. Basically that after what we did with House of Cards, some version of that has to happen with shows. People aren't going to want to wait, and they're not waiting. They're DVRing, they're waiting, they're buying them on DVD, on iTunes, and it's changing the way people watch programming. So I think it's the willingness to jump the rules that is changing the rules for everybody else down the road. It's that kind of disruption. The content itself, I know, because I heard the feedback from the pitch sessions about House of Cards, almost nearly every television network that would have bought House of Cards said, well, we have to put in a good guy. There's no good guy. Basically the ability to put on that show as it is, which is Richard III meets Macbeth, set in D.C., which, by the way, if you do the math, there hasn't been a successful political show outside of West Wing, so that's why they would have never got on television. So that's the kind of way that I think that we're disrupting, is mostly changing the rules of the existing players.
I think there are 2 other ways it's being disrupted. One is there are a lot of new voices that otherwise would have never had access to studios or to agents that you're seeing emerge. I think that you'll see that gain momentum over the next couple of years, but we're seeing unbelievable work from people who would have never broken into the Hollywood system, who are basically just out there doing it. They're developing their own brands, their own voices, similar to what you said about Freddie Wong. If you look at YouTube, you have hundreds of YouTube stars who basically created, are almost like national DJs. They have their own followings, their own audiences, and many of them are making 7 figures a year, basically owning their own relationship with the audience. The other way I think you're going to see it, we're partners with an Israeli company called Interlude.fm that has created this fantastic technology that allows you, in a sense, to follow characters and choose your own adventure and do it in a completely seamless way. And it's sort of the intersection of video games and linear entertainment. And I think that you're going to see new technologies begin to create, and not for movie watching. It's not for 60, 90 minute, it's not as a substitute for movie watching, but I think you're going to see more and more of these experiences that are blended experiences that use technology, especially with young audiences that are just remarkably engaging.
We're right at the end. This gentleman, you have like a 15-second question? Real brief? Yeah.
Eric Kuhn with UTA, one of the agents probably in the system. And we represent Freddie Wong, and we also recently sold Awesomeness TV to DreamWorks. And I was surprised by the lack of conversation around the future of television, or the lack of or the lack mention of YouTube, which I know is some space that you're very involved in. I was wondering if you could talk about, they spent $100 million in sort of original content, and where does YouTube fit into this ecosystem?
YouTube, future of television, we can check that box off fast. Brian?
I think YouTube is a great platform. It allows creators to reach an audience at scale. I think that it's definitely part of the solution, but I think that for media brands,
it's also Star Search. I mean, it's
and it's a great way to discover. It's sort of the top of the big end of the funnel. But I think that for businesses to become real sustainable businesses, I think that YouTube is a piece of the puzzle. I don't think it's the answer.
Yeah, and they've done incredibly well at monetizing short form, which is certainly not competitive with traditional TV in that way, and really does expand the universe. So.
Well, I want to thank you both. I mean, for me, this has been an incredible morning of learning about disruption across a lot of platforms. I told some of the other audiences I was watching some old Johnny Carson and Ed Sullivan shows, and you just remember back to at least my youth when we just didn't have choice, and you didn't have disruption, and you didn't have gadgets of the sort that we have, and how rich and diverse it's been. But it seems that both the scale and pace of all this stuff is happening very rapidly. You've got two amazing, dynamic entrepreneurs in this. Again, Ted Sarandos, Chief Content Officer of Netflix, Brian Bedol, Founder and CEO of Bedrock Media Ventures. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.